animator starts with a drawing, a single pose, a moment of movement. But some careers evolve far beyond the frame. Today's guest began as an animator on iconic films like The Little Mermaid, Oliver and Company, The Lion King. Then moved into animation supervision on projects like Garfield, Alvin and the Chipmunks, and Hop. And went on to direct and produce animation across television, features, and original content, including Kim Possible, Scooby-Doo, Paws of Fury, and recently animated productions. His career spans traditional animation, CG, television, feature films, and mentoring the next generation of storytellers. Today we talk about that journey, how to grow from animator to director, and the advice students need as they enter animation workforce today. Welcome to Behind the Magic, the podcast where we go behind the scenes with industry professionals, mentors, and creators, shaping the future of animation and game development. I'm your host, Mauricio Ferrazza, and today we're joined by Chris Bailey, animator, animation supervisor, director, producer, and industry mentor. Chris has worked across some of the most iconic animated productions and has built a career that spans decades of change in animation in the animation industry. Chris, welcome to Behind the Magic.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
All right, so let's just jump into it. So let's start from the beginning. You started your career as an animator working on major Disney movies like The Little Mermaid, Oliver and Company, and The Lion King. What was it like entering the animation industry during that time?
Well, the industry was actually, believe it or not, depressed at that time. There were very few jobs. I did work a little bit before. I went to Disney Feature Animation about 2 years. Spent a little time at Don Bluth Animation on the video games Dragon's Lair 2 and Space Ace. I worked on a company. I worked for Gary Kurtz, who was a producer on Star Wars, on a film called Little Nemo that ultimately I think never got made. But all these studios closed down after about 6 or 7 months. So I'd get a job, we'd work, the studio would disappear. But I was able to accumulate enough work that was of Disney quality that I got hired to on some Sport Goofy projects. And when the Sport Goofy unit was closed down, they asked me to come on and help finish The Great Mouse Detective. So that was my path into Disney feature animation.
What was it like, and what did you learn just jumping right into these huge titles as an animator?
Wow, the way you put it is exactly how I felt. I felt like a little minnow thrown into the ocean above my head. I worked with some great mentor supervisors. I worked under Glenn Keane and Oliver and Company. And I just learned so much from that because I would do my first pass of a shot and then I'd show it to him. We'd go back to the desk and he would draw over it and he would strengthen poses and take out the extra poses that weren't needed. Hendel Butoy was another supervisor I had on Oliver and Company. Same thing. He had a very different approach than Glenn. He was all about meticulously thumbnailing the shots and working out all the problems before you ever went to final animation. And he gave me just wonderful nuts and bolts direction. So Glenn was more like the artist animator. You got to feel it, and he'd draw these big grease pencils and you could just feel the force in his drawings. And Hendel was about planning and articulation. They're both brilliant, but I learned so much with those two different approaches.
Wow, that's amazing. So, and then you later transitioned into animation supervision, working on projects like Garfield, Alvin and the Chipmunks, and Hop. So how does the mindset change when you move from being an animator into being an animation supervisor?
Well, you have to kind of shift away from wanting to do the work to supervising the work. So in a way, you don't actually do a lot, but you're responsible for a lot. And I'd done a little bit of CG before I joined Disney Feature Animation. So my first job was Hocus Pocus, live action film. They play it every year. It's become a fun sort of perennial thing. And the Hocus Pocus people came to Disney Feature Animation because they weren't happy with their cat animation. And Peter Schneider, who was running the departments, said, "Oh, go talk to Chris Bailey," because I was one of the few 2D animators that had CG experience, and that was my journey into CG supervision. And really, it was kind of tough for me because I love doing it. I'm still an animator today, even though I supervise. So I'm always having to remind myself to don't do it for people, aside from a draw over, like I was taught, just to supervise more and draw less.
Which
Don't try to use someone as your hands in a way.
and what skills do you need to perform that job as an animation supervisor?
Well, you need to be able to speak clearly, and you need to be able to demonstrate the direction if the artist doesn't understand. I think that's pretty much it. And understand really when you're directing, when you're an animator, you're the actor. So you're getting direction from the director, right? And when you're directing, you're giving that direction to the animators. When you're an animation supervisor on those films, you're kind of in between. Like the way that I think about it is when I'm on set for Alvin and the Chipmunks or Garfield, I work with the director and I'm representing Garfield or Alvin and the Chipmunks. That's my job. I work with these little stuffed animals and work with the actors for timing and that kind of thing. And then, but my job is really to carry out the director's direction when I work with the individual animators in post.
What is the difference between animation supervisor, and technical animation or animator?
I'm not completely sure because I've had both those. I've had different titles, and I feel like I kind of do the same thing on those movies. I've been a creature animation consultant. I was the animation director. I've been an animation supervisor. I was actually the animation director, and I've had the animation director title. What you are when you do those jobs is you're ultimately responsible for the performance of the characters, helping all the animators on a certain character animate one character. So it feels like one person drew it all.
And when you're doing animation supervision in a movie and with several animated characters, do you have an animator for each character?
That varies. Sometimes at Disney Feature, they would cast according to character. I did Nessus in Hercules. Other times, everybody does everything. Sometimes, some productions they'll go sequence by sequence and they'll just divvy up the animation according to people's strengths. Some people are action animators, some people are more acting animators. Then there's the chubby cheek cute animators. You give the chubby cheek characters to them. But it's been done both ways. It's really a director prerogative.
All right. And then you moved on into directing feature animation and TV animation, including Kim Possible, Scooby-Doo, and Paws of Fury. How does directing animation differ from supervising animation?
You're responsible for a whole lot more. If you think, I like to think of when you're directing, you're like the spoke of a bicycle wheel. So you're in the middle, and all the spokes below that are all reporting to you, and you're responsible for their work. Then there's all these spokes on top of you that are pointing down on you, whether it's a creative producer or a studio or all of that. So there's a lot of pressure to the job, and there's a lot more people to respond to. But ultimately, I think it comes down to the same thing. It's about, you're trying to communicate your vision. If you're a football team, it's like the goalpost is that way. You want everyone to run that way, right? But you don't say, oh, you have to run and hit, cross the goal line between those two blades of grass. That's like directing a little too tightly. So you want to keep a broad direction.
It's amazing that you were able to actually, navigate through all these different roles in the animation industry. And today, or what's your favorite?
Gosh, I love visual effects because visual effects, I love, like, first of all, I love it all, and I would go back and do any of them in a second. But TV, if it's not coming together, there's not enough time, and it's very frustrating because it's got to ship on Friday, no matter what. In feature animation, when you're at Disney, DreamWorks, that kind of thing, there's a lot of money and there's a lot of time. And almost every movie, there was a sequence that was cut for a version of something that I thought was better, because there's time to keep working it. And there's a term called working something to failure. And that does happen sometimes. So the films don't fail. Films are all great, but there's always something I feel gets worked too much. Visual effects, there's time to do it right, but man, once it works, they like ship it, you know.
So you've seen the industry literally going from hand-drawn animation all the way to digital pipelines. Well, what changed the most for you like that?
Wow. Um, I think the abruptness of everything going to CG, it just seemed to like turn overnight. It wasn't a smooth transition for a lot of people. And I've always been a big advocate for students. I teach a lot now to just learn new technologies. In the beginning, when new technologies are being adopted, studios will help train you. But then once they're established, and if you haven't learned those things, you're left behind or you have to take classes on your own to catch up.
And as an animator, doesn't matter either hand-drawn animation or digital animation, what are the skills that you have to have?
You have to learn how to draw. You have to understand good drawing. Even if you don't draw well, you have to understand good drawing. Um, I would say that's the number one thing because the drawing you make, whether it's for a storyboard or animation, it has to tell a story. It's not enough that you're drawing your character doing the thing you want. You have to communicate that to everybody. So I always encourage people when you do a pose or do a storyboard, show it to people who don't know anything about your story and just hold it up and say, what's happening here?
Artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
How is it affecting, I mean, the animation industry right now, or as far as you know?
Well, it's definitely creating some chaos just by the virtue of it existing. I think with in terms of jobs, it's not going to affect jobs for a while, except in development. It used to be that there were a lot of jobs that were 1 week jobs, 4 week jobs, where an executive has an outline for a TV show or a movie, and they would hire someone like me to do some rough character design, some situational illustrations. Well, now, and they would take those drawings into the executive to get money to further develop the show. Now they just type in prompts and they have AI develop those things and they take those AI generative images into their executive and get a thumbs up or thumbs down. So those jobs have definitely gone away in large part.
Do you see AI infiltrating itself further in the animation industry?
I do. I mean, by virtue, if you've read the news, Ben Affleck recently sold his AI company and he's trained it on filmmaking. And there's also an animator friend of mine just posted some work and some AI was used on a feature that she's animating on. Now she's an artist and she's a director and she understands how to use AI to do the things that they didn't have the crew to do or the money to do to add production value. But she was directing the performances. Directing AI still seems to be an issue. I've never really got it to do what I want. I mean, I've played around a little with it. I've taken pictures of me scuba diving with my buddy, and I've had sharks come in and eat us and things like that. It never quite does it the way I wish if I was actually animating a scene. But I don't know. It's just going to get better. I do get frustrated with people that mock AI, that it will never do this, or look how bad it is. I'm like, it was just a couple of years ago that it was like Will Smith eating spaghetti with like 100 heads and a dozen sets of arms, and it's like the speed at which it's progressing is amazing. But here's one thing that's good. The studios will brag that I can now make a studio or make a animated movie for 10% of the cost with 10% of the crew, and everyone naturally gets upset because it's antagonistic. But that also means that an animator, director, and a couple of their friends can make a movie that looks like it costs $100 million. And with the internet, you don't need a studio's distribution system anymore. I think the key for studios and young filmmakers will be figuring out what the new economy is and how to monetize film, because everyone's trying to figure that out right now.
And what still keeps you motivated?
I still love doing it. I actually love just like making two characters do something. I'm making a short film on my own, and I love teaching. I teach at Chapman University. I teach at Magic, and I work at Exceptional Minds, which is animation academy and studio for neurodivergent animators. And I love doing that because it's ridiculously talented crew there. And we're just taking everybody's skills to the next level.
So now talking to students directly, what should they focus on first? Portfolio, networking, or technical skills?
I don't think there is a first. If you get up in the morning and you meet somebody, that's networking. They do that first. But you have to have all those things. If you don't network, no one's going to know you're looking for work. If you don't have the skills, no one's going to hire you. So I think those are all, all equal.
What mistakes do you see new graduates do over and over and over and over?
The biggest thing is there's kind of a sameness to people's work. They draw what they like watching on TV, or the internet. And a lot of it is with their drawings are sort of copying the lines of what they watch, but they don't really understand the drawing underneath. You need to be able to understand how things work before you can caricature it.
Do you prefer a highly skilled animator that has no soft skills than a person that is absolutely relatable and working teams, but it's not so good?
Well, that's funny. There's an executive I know, and I happen to agree with this, that he says if there's three things like fast, personable, and good, you have to have at least two of those things. If you're fast and you're good, you can be a little difficult. If you're slow but you're good and everybody likes having you around, that's good too. Good for the morale, good for the show. But you can't be deficient in two of those things.
So you're teaching, like you said.
Yeah.
What stands out to you about the next generation of animators?
I think how the variety of work that people are liking is pretty exciting to me. Like when I went to school, the bar was Disney or Warner Brothers, that classic, those dimensional characters that you draw. And now people love that because it's still very popular. You can see with the Bad Guys or, the Nimona, those type of films. But then also there's stuff that is like kind of awkwardly drawn, like, what's this thing the other day? What was it? I think it was called Carnival Burger or something. It's these guys dressed as clowns and they're in a food truck. It was weird and funny, and one of my students pointed it out to me, and it was really well directed by the standards that I grew up with at Disney Warner Brothers. Mm-hmm. It's ugly. But that doesn't seem to hold people back. So I kind of like that people are going for those different looks. There's room for everybody. It's a pretty big pool.
Last question. If you were a student today, what would you be obsessing with for the next 12 months? Obsessed in learning, yeah.
Really, it would be film grammar and AI. Can I use AI to produce more of the work of my vision?
All right. Well, thank you so much.
All right. This was fun. I love it. We got to do it again.
Yes. All right. Thank you.
All right. Is that good?